program that's devoted to the largest segment of society. To those of you who know that the world's religious, political, economic, and military institutions are corrupt, counterproductive, and cannot be fixed. I am Yahowah. Our phone number, if you'd like to join us, is 877-300-7645. Republicans came up with a new budget plan that trims social spending, attempts to rein in entitlements. I can't even say trims. That would be inappropriate in today's world. That sought to decrease the rapid runaway growth of entitlement programs that have run amok. All the while, they wish to spend more money on the military and making war. The president responded to that, the great economist that he is, because, of course, he's never so much as held a single job in the private sector. Never once. He hasn't even had the opportunity to say, would you like fries with that hamburger? But yet he claims that he is the expert on all things economic, and he called it, he says, that's just a return to trickle down, which got us into this mess. You know, I am absolutely appalled. I mean, I find the President of the United States to be reprehensible, disgusting, completely incompetent, and wholly dishonest. There is no economic plan, scheme, process, system called trickle down. You can't return to it because it doesn't exist. It never did exist. It was simply a democratic ploy, propaganda. Saying that there is a trickle-down economic theory is like saying that Jews wrote the elders of the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's a lie that has been repeated so often that the lie is now considered believable. There is no such thing as trickle down. Now, if the Democrats continue to have their way, there will continue to be deluge down, robbing those who are productive, thwarting their productivity, and rewarding those who are not productive, thwarting their aspirations to do something useful with their lives. Now, there is an economic theory, one that has been tried and found to be true, called supply side. It was created by Arthur Laffer, a professor at the University of Southern California. He wasn't the first to realize what I'm going to share with you, because what I'm going to share with you is obvious. And the very fact that it isn't understood says that we, as a nation, particularly politically, have become a sea of nincompoops. Supply side says that if you overtax businesses and individuals that run businesses and corporations, if you overtax them, that the revenues to government will actually decrease. And that if you reduce the taxes on them to more reasonable levels, the revenues to government will actually increase. Now, the reason is obvious. When you overtax businesses and the individuals who run businesses, as America does with the highest corporate tax rates in the world, businesses do not have the incentive nor the means to invest. The government is seizing their profits, so they can't be reinvested into the business for the business to grow. And the incentive to work hard and to make sacrifices to build a business are hugely reduced when between federal and state and local taxes and property taxes and all manners of fees, that more than half of what you make is confiscated by the government. So, when government gets to be too greedy and taxes businesses and those who run them too aggressively, the revenues to government decrease because the overall economic output of the country decreases. Government gets a larger share of a much smaller pie. That's supply-side economics. Ronald Reagan implemented supply-side economics. It worked. He substantially reduced tax rates, particularly on business. And when he did, to normalized levels, the economy flourished. Government took in more revenue. Now, if you were to say, but with trickle down, you know, we went into greater deficits. Yes, we did. Had nothing to do with economic growth, had nothing to do with revenue increases to government. It had to do with the stupid side of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan decided that he wanted America to have a military larger than the rest of the world combined. Maybe starred in too many war movies. He wanted a Navy of 600 ships when the Navy can't even justify 200. And so he did bankrupt the nation. And his desire to have the world's largest military and therefore bankrupt the Soviet Union as they attempted to keep up. He did bankrupt the Soviet Union in their attempt to keep up. But he also bankrupted America. It was a lose-lose scenario. But that's supply-side economics. It's logical. Anybody with half a brain that looks at that understands anything about business and incentive can understand why it works and how Laffer quantified it, and then you can look at the Reagan years and demonstrate that it did work. So there is supply-side economics. There's no such thing as trickle-down. The President of the United States is once again showing his absolute ignorance, his complete incompetence, and his preference for deception. Speak of being ignorant, irrational, immoral, just outright stupid. It was the Abominator who came up with this great plan that he could get rid of 5 of the known murderers being held in Guantanamo. There were 5 senior-ranking Taliban members in Guantanamo who were directly responsible for the murder, not of Americans, but of Muslims. And what was a Sunni on Shia onslaught. And America chose to trade those 5 known mass murderers for Bergdahl, Bo Bergdahl, Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Remember when Bo Bergdahl was traded? I told you that Bo Bergdahl left because he was disgusted by what America was doing in Afghanistan. And any rational and moral person exposed to what America is actually doing in Afghanistan would be disgusted. And that he chose to leave after being told he could not leave. You know, when you join the military, you're not fighting for freedom. You're forfeiting your freedom. And here he was. He didn't want to be there anymore. He knew that what we were doing was wrong, and it is, and he left. And he was picked up by the Taliban, who treated him marvelously, played games with him, cooked with him. And then I told you that the United States, in sacrificing, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 additional lives, let's say 2, because it was either 2 or 3, additional lives trying to find him, that this notion is that they were trying to save him and that they risk additional lives trying to rescue him, I said, is absolute nonsense. No, they're not trying to save him. They're trying to demonstrate to everybody else in the military that if you express your free will and choose to leave them, they will hunt you down. They were going after him to imprison him. They wanted to make an example of him. And America sacrificed either 2 or 3 additional lives trying to hunt this man down to prevent him from expressing his free will. And then the idiot that infects the White House of the United States decided that I could play soldier and I could say that no man left behind, and I could pretend like I'm really a commander-in-chief, and I could negotiate for his release. Now, he prevents, under threat of imprisonment, any family member who has a child that is kidnapped by an Islamic organization for negotiating with them, and yet he traded 5 senior Taliban officers, mass murderers, for a man whose future was simple and sure. He was going to be thrown in prison. What difference is it for him to be in a military prison or him to be a guest of the Taliban? And he was a guest. Wasn't held in a cage. Wasn't maltreated. Why would you do that? Why would you not only sacrifice American lives, but then release 5 known mass murderers, saying that you didn't want him left behind when you knew, in fact, he'd be found guilty of desertion, and his fate is now certain. He will serve time in prison. And where are all of those morons still touting their Obama stickers and saying, yeah, that was pretty stupid? Oh, by the way, it's interesting that just yesterday, the media released that at least 5 of the Taliban leaders that were traded last year for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Remember that we not only got the pledge of these individuals that they wouldn't go back to the Taliban, and we got the assurance of Qatar. Remember, the president said, you know, we did this with Qatar. I can't tell you about it because it's secret, super secret. It's beyond your pay grade. Can't tell you what we agreed to, but Qatar absolutely swore that if we sent them back to them, that they would watch over them, and they assured us that they wouldn't return to any terrorist organization. Now, 2 of the 5 are unknown to us. We haven't a clue where they are. Qatar doesn't even know where they are. 3 of the 5 have rejoined the Taliban. Anybody who negotiates with a Muslim, expecting the Muslim to honor their side of the agreement, is ignorant. You know, ignorance isn't bliss. It's deadly. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. Most of you probably have heard that a German Airbus, an A320, which is the same size as the Boeing 737, which is the backbone of Boeing's fleet, most popular jet in the world. This is Airbus's copy of the Boeing 737, an A320. Was crashed into the Alps. And it was deliberately crashed. The news all reports that the black boxes show that the pilot of the aircraft was locked out of the cockpit. When you're at cruise altitude, it's not uncommon for a pilot to get up and stretch their legs or to use the facilities. Or sometimes they just want to go talk to the stewardesses. And they'll get up, and then there's a procedure now how they block the galley to the airplane with the food trays, and then the pilot gets out, and then they lock the door. Now, there's a keypad on the outside of that door to get back in, but that keypad can be disabled by somebody in the cockpit. Well, the captain did get out. The pilot disabled the keypad, and he could not get back in. And the co-pilot, according to the reports, pushed a button that had to be deliberately pushed to set the airplane into a descent from its cruise altitude. And then they say, it's a button that had to be deliberately pushed. Well, I'm here to tell you that while I'm not familiar with the specific layout of the Airbus A320, that virtually all airplanes work the same in this regard. There are 3 different ways that you can choose to change altitude, all on autopilot. One is you just simply override the autopilot first and just push the nose of the airplane down, and it'll gain speed and unless you pull the power back, and it'll fall apart unless you pull the power back, and if you pull the power back, you can descend quite rapidly. but it's an uncomfortable ride. That's not what happened. This aircraft was sent into a very methodical descent. And the way that you can do it, you can change the flight level. You can change the airspeed, and you can actually set a rate of descent or climb, whichever you choose. And then you choose, let's say he chose flight level change, or let's say he chose rate of descent. What you then do is you have a dial that you dial in feet per minute, the rate that you would like to descend. 100 feet a minute, 200, 500, 1,000, 1,500. Jets typically descend at the most normal descent rate would be 1,500 feet a minute. Let's say the airplane was at 30,000 feet. So at that level, it's going to take about 20 minutes for the airplane to crash at sea level, but this was the Alps, so about 10 minutes it's going to crash, and you could dial in any number beyond that. So you have here suicide by pilot. The pilot's name has been offered. It does not appear to be Islamic. However, we don't know much at this point, other than he was in his late 20s. This is what we do know, that there have been 3 similar incidents which were caused by deliberate pilot action. One was the most recent, 2013, was by LAM Mozambique Airlines. It was a flight between Mozambique and Angola, and it crashed in Namibia, killing 33 people. The initial investigations came to the conclusion the accident was deliberately carried out by the captain shortly after the first officer, the co-pilot, left the flight deck. He was a Muslim. On October 31st of 1999, an Air Egypt Boeing 767, this is something that many Americans are aware of, went into a rapid descent 30 minutes after taking off from New York, JFK, killing 217 people. The investigation determined the crash was caused deliberately by the relief officer, and he was a Muslim. In 1987, December 19, more than 100 people were killed when a Boeing 737 traveling from Indonesia to Singapore, again a Muslim crew, crashed. The pilot, suffering from, quote, multiple work-related difficulties, suspected of switching off the flight recorders and intentionally putting the airplane into a dive. And then we have the most recent Malaysian Airlines flight that simply vanished into the sea under deliberate pilot action. The common denominator on all of those that have gone before is that the crew was Islamic. In this case, it may or may not be a Muslim. But we will talk about what we ought to determine either way. Talking about the airline crash, there are lessons to be learned whether or not this pilot is Muslim. If he is like the, I'm going to say 4 as opposed to 3 before, because it certainly seems that the Malaysian airline was deliberate. That if you trust a Muslim with your life, you're a fool. If you trust a Muslim to honor an agreement that they have made, you're ignorant. If you're like the President of the United States and playing king with Muslims and negotiating with them and trying to force Israel to capitulate to them for promises of peace, then you are counterproductive. You're working against the interest of sanity. In Islam, Muhammad made lying part of the religion. In Islam, his wannabe God made breaking agreements essential. I'm not making this up. Read the Hadith, read the Quran. Read the opening statement in the 9th Surah. Both Muhammad and Allah acknowledge in the Quran that they lie and should not be trusted. So, To get in an airplane piloted by a Muslim is a fool's folly. To negotiate an agreement and expect a Muslim to honor it is sheer insanity. Now, let's say it was not a Muslim. We in the United States and in Europe, and this would also be true in Australia and New Zealand, have, like lemmings, all collectively instituted political correctness as our national religion. And it is the religion that is taught in schools. And so, as is the case of religions, children and students are indoctrinated in the doctrine of that religion as opposed to being educated. In the case of political correctness, the central plank is not to be judgmental, not to be discerning, not to be discriminating. And so what it does is it creates a product that is incapable of being moral, incapable of being just, incapable of being rational, incapable of making good decisions. You know, in religion, people of faith are immune to evidence and reason. The religion itself precludes them from even being open to evidence which is contrary to their faith. And they will avoid being rational. When you point out the simplicity, it's impossible that Paul could have been inspired by the very God that he routinely demeaned and contradicted. Paul cannot have spoke for Yahowah, even if you knew his name wasn't Jesus Christ, when he never quoted him once, and Yahowah's statements and Paul's are the opposite of one another. But you point that out to a Christian, I can't process it. Well, in the case of political correctness, the students are rendered incapable of processing that information and rendering good judgment. And unfortunately, and I know that this strikes a younger generation poorly, but there's a problem with video games, particularly video games where all you have to do is reboot the game and you get to live all over again. There are these, great quests where whether it's a first-person shooter or some other game where you're dealing with life and death, but you can simply reboot and go on again. And so if it was not a Muslim, what we have to recognize is that in the West, we've created a religion that is incapacitating in terms of exercise of good judgment as the religions that have preceded it. We have Glenn on the line. Glenn may want to comment on what we're talking about now, but Glenn made some very profound statements at the end of our program a day or two ago. So my pleasure to welcome Glenn back. Hi.
Yes, the yeast stuff, as I recall.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you, talk about the yeast, the fungus of sin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, geez, Louise, flying things. Why can't these guys wait till they're driving in their private car and just drive into a bridge abutment? You talk about the judgment. I mean, whether they were Muslim or on SSRIs or whatever may have been clouding their judgment. I mean, do you really have to take a bunch of other people who aren't necessarily signed up for it along for the ride?
But you're looking at this as a rational person capable of exercising good judgment, and you say, if your life is so miserable that you want to end it on your own. Don't harm other people in the process. But, the person that is doing this is incapable of exercising good judgment, and so they find some pleasure in knowing that they're taking others with them. There's a lot of people that are just mad at the world that think, the guy that was so crazy in Goleta, Santa Barbara at UCSB that thought that he was the most handsome, most desirable bachelor in the world and couldn't believe that girls would turn him down for dates. So he went off specifically to on what was a suicide spree, but to take as many pretty girls down with him. That mindset is fairly pervasive today. We've indoctrinated monsters.
What's disturbing, and that's disturbing, of course, but what's even more disturbing to me is when you see all professional educations and professional training and are charged with professional responsibility. The guy who flipped the cruise ship and was, wanted his breakfast brought to him or something, and
the guy that flipped the cruise ship, his motivation, first of all, I think that the more education you have, if it's not in the sciences, the worse. The worse it is, because you're subject to the indoctrination of political correctness for a longer period of time and by more individuals, and eventually it'll get to you. But the guy that flipped that cruise ship, the reason he did that was a breach of morality. He invited a dancer on the ship as his cabin mate that he first had been involved in an inappropriate relationship with when she was a dancer on the ship. Now he invited her to be his shipmate, and he specifically wanted to show off for her. That's why he went close to the island.
Well, and it's just amazing. I mean, you expect, actually, there's a reasonable societal expectation that people who fly planes or captain ships have better judgment than those who aren't charged with such responsibilities, which shows you there's something inherently wrong with a system that is certifying these people and licensing them.
I don't think that, I know a lot about the certification for airline pilots because I hold the same certification. It's called Air Transport Pilot, and that's the certification I hold. And it is it's a test of skills, and it can only be a test of skills and a test of knowledge. You have to perform at a certain level and have a certain level of knowledge to be able to perform these particular skills. It is just a test of skills, and that's really all it can be. And there really is no extra education that is required to be a pilot of an airplane or an airline.
Now, contrast this with the extensive military background of Sully, who landed the plane on the river, right? The very experienced military pilot, then become a civilian pilot.
What he did there is even, first of all, if it were me in that same situation when you recognize that you've lost both engines, I would have put it down in Teterboro. But he waited too long because he was too process-oriented and too methodical, so he couldn't put it down in Teterboro because he went by the book, and rather than reacting to the problem and solving it initially, he was process-oriented, and by the time that he reached the process of, I can't make it to Teterboro anymore, he decided to put it down in the river. A water landing like that is something to receive the certifications we all practice. What he did was made to look heroic because America is desperate for heroes, but most pilots are just disgusted by the attention the man received, because we all know that he was too process-oriented, took too long to make the decision as to where to go, and ran out of past the most viable options, which were going back to the existing airport they took off from, landing to Teterboro, and so he made a water landing, and water landings are not uncommon. People survive them all the time.
Well, I'm thinking of a barge that hit a bridge down in Texas where my parents lived down there at the Gulf. I mean, again, that was a captain who wasn't at helm doing what he shouldn't have been doing. Or if we go all the way back to Hazelwood and Prince William Sound, that's where most of us trace the beginning of this these phenomena becoming more popular and frequent.
He was intoxicated. He was he drank too much because the job was so boring. And he had gone down to his bunk, and he wasn't paying attention. But it's all stems from, I think, the same thing has become more prominent for two reasons. One is that we've indoctrinated generation after generation in political correctness. We've lost the ability to exercise good judgment, and that's a real serious problem, and maybe the single biggest problem with our society. And the second is we don't hold people accountable.
Right, and especially not white-collar, people. I mean, the travesties going on, if you look at the millions of lives affected and gazillions of dollars lost by, white-collar crime, and the weasel worders where everything is, we'll just clarify that. It's like you can't clarify a complete contradiction.
And I would say that I'm going to be careful here because a lot of folks are blaming banks and businesses for the current great recession that we're still in the midst of. And actually that recession was caused almost exclusively by government. It's the morons in government that know nothing about work, nothing about economics, nothing about free enterprise, that continue to pass legislation that made home ownership such that you didn't have to put anything down. You got an adjustable rate that would go up so that when it went up, you couldn't afford the home anymore. You had no equity in the home, so you had no investment in the home. They passed laws on foreclosure, and by the time they had gerrymandered the system to the extent that they had home loans that were worthless. And then they passed legislation that allowed the bundling of these home loans and selling them. It was the public sector government meddling in the private sector, making a mess of things.
And getting rid of Glass-Steagall.
And who, amongst government officials, took responsibility? I mean, many of these laws were passed under Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. Reagan can't accept responsibility, but Bill Clinton sure as hell could. There is a distinct possibility that an unchecked blunder by the abominator, the President of the United States, may have started World War III. I said it at the time, thinking that it was a possibility, saying that when he declared war on the Islamic State, that the violence that we were witnessing between Sunni and Shia Islam would explode. I said that the Islamic State, by declaring war on them, recognizing the nature of Islam as a declaration of war against all humankind, that the Islamic State would grow in numbers, and it has, grow in popularity, and it has, grow in capability, and it has, and grow in ruthlessness, and it has. And that the war that Yahowah states will lead to World War III, which is this infighting in Iraq and Syria between Sunni and Shiite Muslims, is the catalyst for World War III. And the abominator, by siding with the Iranians, and now we even do coordinate joint missions. Almost all of the attacks in Iraq against the Islamic State are being fought by regular military units from Iran. Well, the Iranians have gained so much influence over the Middle East since America's not only invasion in Iraq, but America giving Iran's only enemy to them, and then providing Iran with a huge military in Iraq. That in Yemen, the Shias have overtaken the government. Pure chaos, total civil war. And it was 2 days ago that in the Yemeni capital, that over 130 people were murdered in a mosque when Sunnis struck back at the Shias. So what happened today? Glenn, are you aware of what happened today that is just mind-boggling in terms of expansion of the war in the Islamic world?
Are you referring to the Saudi bombings in Yemen?
I am.
Yeah.
So today they launched 100 bombing missions. The Saudi Arabians launched 100 bombing missions over Yemen.
That's upping the ante quite a bit.
Oh, and then the Iranians are screaming, "What in the world are you doing? Saudi Arabia, engaging in the civil war that's taking place in Yemen." All the while, the United States is providing the military hardware for both sides. With Iran, we're providing all of their military hardware now through Iraq, and training and working with Iranian regular army troops there in Iraq, and on the other side, we're supplying all the weapons for the Saudi Arabians.
And add to that the strange bastardized relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The connections there. It all ties together and could all blow up into a huge conflagration.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that publicly Saudi Arabia calls for Israel's demise. Religiously, they're the top Muslim religious officials in Saudi Arabia actually tell Muslims, particularly the mythical people known as the Palestinians, that they have every right to murder Jewish men and to rape Jewish women. There's a famous sermon where he goes on and on talking about the savagery that Muslims in Israel ought to be perpetrating against Jews. And yet the Saudi Arabians have not engaged in any one of the Islamic wars against Israel.
No. And their secret, their intelligence agencies have notable connections with Mossad and such, too.
Yeah, but the only connection that their intelligence agencies have is for their mutual enemy.
Right. Iran.
And this strike by Saudi Arabia today is exposing the fact that Americans, and particularly American politicians, are clueless as to what's happening in the Middle East or what caused it. That this is a war that is escalating because the United States invaded Iraq and gave Iraq to Iran, dramatically increasing the influence of Shia Islam in the Middle East, and the Saudi Arabians are lashing back every way they know how. And so the war is between Sunni and Shia Islam, which pits Saudi Arabia against Iran. And the United States is caught right in the middle because of our stupidity.